Hi, I'm Jeff Strong. I'm creator of Rhythmic Entrainment Intervention and co-founder and creative director of BrainShiftRadio.com. Today I want to talk about the nuances of driving consciousness with drums. On a lot of my videos I talk about REI, the therapy, Rhythmic Entrainment Intervention, and I talk about drum healing, the traditions that REI comes from. They're both using very different tempos. And as a matter of fact, the oldest technique for drumming to drive consciousness uses the slowest technique of any, the slowest rhythm of any, in about 4 beats per second, right around here. And this tempo really is designed to bring you into the deepest level of the theta state of consciousness. Theta is an inwardly directed state where we're focused on an internal experience and we're less responsive to the world around us. This tempo is the deepest level of theta, which exists between about 4 and 8 cycles per second. This would be 4 cycles per second. This is what the shamans have been doing for tens of thousands of years. The idea here is that you bring that brain into the deepest levels of theta. It deepens your meditations, it makes your visualizations more powerful, and it gives you a chance to be able to experience these journeys that the shamans would use as kind of the core of their therapies, their techniques. The technique is really simple with this because the rhythm is really steady. It's just 4 beats per second, steady pulse, no variation at all. And that's really good and really important for the low end of theta. The low end of theta, we're most inwardly directed. We're almost asleep. Just below theta, below 4 hertz, 4 beats per second, is the sleep state of delta, or the deep sleep state of delta. And this low end of theta is really all about being almost unconscious, being in a really receptive, open space. And it's really simple with the drum. Just play this 4 beats per second. It takes anywhere from 12 to 15, 17 minutes the first time you experience it. And the more you experience it, the quicker it is. So if you've been journeying for a while or listening to entrainment music for a while, you're going to respond very quickly. Otherwise, it'll take you a little while. But the brain does learn how to do this because the brain wants to entrain. And this process is called entrainment. And the entrainment is the synchronization of the brainwave patterns to the drumming rhythm. And it's also called auditory driving. The auditory signal, the auditory pulse from the drum can drive the frequencies of the brain. It's very simple, and you just need to follow a couple of rules. The first rule with the low end of theta is really repetitive. If it's not super repetitive, the brain doesn't really know what to do with it. There's some variations you can do, and I talk about this a lot in my drum healing course, but for the most part, steady pulse is the best way to go. And then as you speed the rhythms up, you have different experiences that you can have. The low end of theta, 4.5 beats per second, that's great for deep meditation or the shamanic journeying experience, visualization, those types of things. Great place to be. Go a little bit faster, you get up to about 5 beats per second. Now you're looking at a different experience of being able to have an enhanced sense of intuition. Psychic abilities, for instance, are enhanced, if you believe in those. But just the idea of being able to listen to that subtler voice inside of you. You know, we all have this intuitive sense. It usually comes from a gut feeling we have or an instinct we have about something. Being at this 5 to 5.5 beats per second range within theta really enhances your ability to hear that voice inside of yourself. And speed it up a little bit more, we get up to maybe 6.5 beats per second. Now we're looking at the idea of creativity. That being in the zone, the creative zone of being able to make connections that aren't easily made when we're running around in our normal wakeful state of consciousness. Slow our brains down a little bit, become more receptive. We're now able to really tap into that creative flow. And that's a great tempo, mid theta, 6.5 beats per second. Go a little bit faster up into the 7 beat per second range, which is getting pretty quick. Now you're talking about problem solving. Being able to work through solutions. You're really engaging your brain, but you're also very relaxed. You're almost in the next level of consciousness called alpha, which is a relaxed alert state. We're almost outwardly directed. We do have a lot of awareness toward the outer world, and this is where problem solving can be so good. Go into a 7 beat per second meditation, for instance, using a drum at that tempo with a problem in your mind, with some solution that you're looking for, and you will probably find it. And I'll experiment a little bit with these drumming rhythms here in this video, so you can get a sense of these different tempos and what they feel like. And then if you go a little bit faster to 8 beats per second, now we've transitioned into the alpha state of consciousness. Now alpha is a relaxed alert state, like I said. It's a place where we can have neurological calm. This is what all the REI recordings do. Rhythmic entrainment intervention is really about getting the brain into this deep, lower end of the alpha state of consciousness to help create a neurological calm and a receptiveness so that we then can stimulate the brain through different rhythmic patterns. So I won't go into detail about that in this video. In another video, I'll talk a little bit more detail about how we do REI tempos and REI rhythms, because the tempo doesn't really vary very much with an REI custom program, for instance. It's the rhythms themselves that matters, specificity of the rhythms. An approach I called rhythm healing. The idea that each rhythm has a very particular purpose. You got to play it at the right time in the right way in order to have the effect that you're going for. But this video is going to talk mostly about theta. I want to look at these different levels of theta, give you an idea of the nuances of what you can do with theta, because all the traditional drum healing practices, from the shamanic technique to the West African technique to really anywhere in between, are going to be using theta tempo rhythms. Now, theta tempo rhythms, like I said, 4 beats per second to 8 beats per second. And what does that mean musically? Well, if you were to play 16th notes, which is what most of us are going to be doing when we're playing to music, using that as our pulse. If 4 beats per second, I set the metronome to a tempo, I'm going to be setting the metronome equaling a quarter note to 1 beat of the metronome. And then I'm going to be playing 16th notes. So there's 4 drumming beats for each click of the metronome, which puts 4 beats per second at a metronome setting of 60 beats per minute. So you set the metronome at 60 beats per minute. That's the quarter note, and then you play 16th notes. So you're playing 4 drumming beats for every click of the metronome. Now you're 4 beats per second. So if you're doing triplet-based rhythms, where you're doing 1 ta-ta, 2 ta-ta, 3 ta-ta, 4 ta-ta, where there's 3 beats in between, now you're setting your metronome at 80 beats per minute. That's the low end of theta. 5 beats per second, now you're setting your 16th note, your quarter note, 16th note tempo at 75 beats per minute. You're doing your triplets at 100 beats per minute. So let's start off. I'll play a little bit of the 4 beat per second pulse. Just give you a sense of what this feels like. Just kind of settle in a little bit. Close your eyes, listen, and just see how this makes you feel. It should calm you down. I'm not going to play long enough to get you into a deep meditation unless you have a lot of experience with the drumming. I just want to play for a minute or two, give you a chance to settle into what this kind of feels like. And then we'll try a little faster tempo and see how that feels. So this is roughly 4 beats per second. And I'm going to play a very steady beat because that's what you do at this tempo. If I were to play this long enough, you would get into a really deep meditative state. Your mind would clear, you'd settle in, and chances are you would have a lot of visualizations. You would have a lot of imagery that would go with it. And if you were studying to understand these and experience them like the shamans would, you would start being able to make sense of what all this imagery means. And that's really the goal of the traditional shamanic technique. If you're approaching it from more the perspective of a meditation, like the Buddhist monks when they do their meditations using a drum, what you're looking for there is just an opening and a clearing of your mind, an emptying of your mind, and allowing yourself to just experience. A lot of people at that point just can really feel the drumming resonate within them. And they'll sometimes feel that resonance move around their body depending on just the pitch of the drum and just the pulse of the way the sound builds as we play. So it's a very cool thing. If you get a chance to turn this way up when you listen to the drumming, it can have a whole different effect. So 5 beats per second, like I said, is really great for intuition. It's a place where we're still down in the fairly deep level of theta, but we have a little bit more of a foot in the door of our regular worlds. And so we can hear our inner voice, but also be aware of what's going on a little bit more. 5 beats per second. Once you start speeding up the tempo, you need to start changing the rhythm a little bit. You can't just play this steady pulse that we can do at 4 beats per second at 5 beats per second, because it'll become irritating. So we need to speed it up a little bit. We need to change it up a little bit. So I'll do maybe a simple pattern just to kind of change a little bit. I'm going to play this rhythm that I've played many times before. I even taught this in the free drumming series of the drum healing course. It's called a mambo. It's a 3-3-2 rhythm, really common rhythm, probably the most common rhythm in the world with not just therapeutic drumming, but in music in general. And it sounds like this. And I'll play it about 5 beats per second. For a little while, have you get a sense of what this feels like. So that is got kind of a groove to it. It kind of lets you settle in a little bit. And if you were to listen to this long enough, again, you would settle into a space. And if you went in with the intent of kind of hearing your inner voice, it would really turn it up a notch. This is a real traditional way of kind of heightening intuition. The next tempo that's easy to play around with is 6 beats per second. It's about 90 beats per minute on a metronome if you're playing 16th notes. So remember, there's going to be 4 beats of the drum for every click of the metronome when you set it at 90 beats per minute. Here, we're in the mid theta. We're also dealing with creativity. We're going to need to vary the rhythm some more. You'll notice that what I did with the 5 beats per second is I played a rhythm that wasn't quite steady, 3-3-2, but I didn't change it. It was constant. I didn't do any variations on the 3-3-2 rhythm. And I was able to do that. Your brain is able to shift and you're able to go into the state. I get up to 6 beats per second. Now I need to start changing it around a little bit. I need to do some variations, not a lot. I might change the orchestration a tiny bit. Maybe bring in an extra accent here and there, just to create enough unpredictability to keep the brain engaged as we're getting closer to a wakeful awareness. So let me play it about 6 beats per second here. I'll play the same rhythm. And I'll just show you the difference in the way I would approach it. So in this case, maybe settle back, think about a project you're working on, a creative project you're working on, and see if you can kind of look at the project itself and just see how your mind can expand around it. Maybe you'll be looking at things a little bit differently as I'm playing. I'm not going to play long enough to really let you dig too deep, but you'll get kind of a sense of this, I hope. So it's about 6 beats per second. I'm going to play the 3-3-2 rhythm again. So that kind of opens up creativity. It's a kind of a nice tempo. I probably played it a little bit faster than 6, probably 6.5. And play around with that. Try the 3-3-2 at home. Grab a metronome. You can. There's a lot of metronomes online. You can just click in the tempo you want and set it to go. It's free. There's free apps. There's inexpensive apps. Play along to it. 4 beats for every click of the metronome. 90 beats per minute. 7 beats per second, like I said, is really getting up there towards the threshold of 8 of alpha at 8 beats per second. And so this we're going to be even more tied to kind of a regular awareness. And so we're going to need to vary the rhythm even more. We're going to need to not just stick with the same rhythm and do some quick variations on it, but maybe even flow to a different rhythm as I'm going forward. 7 beats per second is on your metronome 105 beats per minute if you're setting it at quarter notes and you're playing 16th notes. And that would be somewhere around this tempo. So as I play this, maybe take a look at a problem that you've been working on, a project you have at work, or something where you haven't really been able to find the solution. And you just see if your mind opens up a little bit to some alternate ways of looking at it. Maybe making some connections that you weren't able to make before. Again, I won't be playing long enough for you to really dig deep into this, but hopefully it'll give you some sense of what this tempo feels like and how it's different than the other tempos. And I'm going to play a samba this time, because sambas are kind of fun. You'll notice a lot of the rhythms that I use in the drum healing are rhythms that are used in secular music. They're things you can find in regular songs from regular people. The mambo is a really classic Latin rhythm, 3-3-2. You can hear it in just a lot of different songs around the world. The mambo is really common. The samba is also really common. And this is 2 louds, 2 softs, kind of a loping pattern. And it sounds like this. I'll play it about 7 beats per second or so. So that's 7.5 beats per second, where we deal with problem solving. And you'll notice that I changed the rhythm up more. There was a little bit more going on. And that's kind of the continuum of what you do in Theta. Low end of Theta, where you have the deepest experience with a deep meditation, the shamanic experience, really repetitive rhythm. You don't want to change it very much. You'll have some variations because of the inflection of the timbre of the instrument as you're playing the drum, especially given that that traditional technique is using a frame drum that's played with the mallet. And there's really only so much you can do with that. And so it's a real steady pulse. Start speeding it up, you add some accents to it. You create a variable rhythm, like the mambo, the 3-3-2. But you keep that fairly steady, because if you vary it too much, it's jarring for the nervous system and it kind of pulls you out. As you speed up a little bit more to 6 beats per second, now you take that same rhythm or something like it, and you create minor variations on it. Change the orchestration, add some fills and some licks here and there, just to make it a little bit less predictable. Then once you get up to 7.5 beats per second, you're really close to that alpha state of consciousness. And now you're looking at doing a bit more variation in your rhythms. You want a little bit more complexity and you want a lot more variability. Then when you get into the 8, the 9, the 10 beats per second, where REI exists, and a lot of the music on Brain Shift Radio and the focus or the calm categories, especially in the brain boost category, most of them are in the alpha state, 8 to 12 beats per second. The rhythms get more complex and more variable, less predictable, less repetitive. So if I would play a mambo, for instance, I wouldn't play that pattern many times through before I switched to something else, because that would become too predictable if I got into a groove with it. So I'd be changing it a lot. That's what you're doing when you're getting up into the alpha state. That's what we do with REI. What we've done with REI, though, is because over the years we've really kind of refined the process. We know how different patterns affect the brain in different ways. So we're going to choose specific types of rhythms and patterns depending on what we're trying to accomplish. So that's a really key component of the REI end of it. But if you're doing drum healing and you're in Theta, there's not a lot you need to do with variability, just make it interesting. So remember, lowest end, most repetitive, highest end, most variable. So that's how you deal with Theta, with drum healing. The nuances of what you can do with deep meditation, intuition, creativity, problem solving, and pick up a drum and play a little bit. Hopefully you can find some rhythms you can noodle around with, check out the free drum healing course, free video series at drumhealing.com. And next week I'll talk a little bit more about the tempos we use with REI.